My daughter's fiancé asked about the BC assessment on our Naramata property 4 times in 3 months. The first time, I told myself it was city curiosity. The fourth time, standing in my own kitchen with his coffee going cold and his eyes tracking the apple rows down toward the lakeshore, something shifted in my chest. Not alarm, exactly. More like recognition. The kind that comes from 32 years of triage nursing. The feeling that what you're looking at and what's actually happening are 2 different things. At the rehearsal dinner, my daughter slid a folded cocktail napkin under my wine glass without looking at me. I opened it under the table, 2 words in her handwriting, small and careful: "Help me." The next morning, I stood in a stone chapel near Penticton with 80 guests watching, and I made a decision. I could let the ceremony proceed, or I could tell the truth in front of everyone, right then. I chose truth. I have never once looked back. My husband and I bought the Naramata property in 1994 when it was still mostly scrub and second growth, with an old apple orchard that nobody had bothered with in a decade. We paid $210,000 for it, which felt enormous at the time. He was a civil engineer with the province. I was a nurse at Kelowna General, and we ate a lot of rice and beans for 2 years to keep the mortgage from swallowing us. He spent every weekend clearing fence lines, rebuilding the old packing shed, planting another 3 acres of apple trees. I called him optimistic. He called himself patient. He said, "This valley is going to be something one day. We're just early." He was right. By the time the wine tourists started coming, and the Naramata bench became something people wrote about in travel magazines, we had 10 acres, a renovated farmhouse, a working orchard, and a strip of old vines he'd replanted from rootstock he'd driven down from the Similkameen himself. BC assessment valued it at $2,400,000. People who knew the valley knew fair market ran closer to $3 million. He died of a stroke 3 years ago, on an ordinary Tuesday in September, while he was staking young apple trees at the far end of the property. I found him just before supper. I won't go further into that part. Some things you carry, you don't spread them out for examination. What matters is that after 31 years of marriage, I was alone on 10 acres in Naramata with a farmhouse full of his tools, his books, his reading glasses still on the kitchen table where he'd left them. His provincial pension continued. His RRSPs had converted to a RRIF. Close to $1 million. The life insurance paid out. Between the property, the investments, and my own nurse's pension, I was comfortable in a way neither of us had planned for or particularly advertised. We'd never been flashy people. Same Honda since 2011. Same winter coat for 12 years. My daughter grew up going to Value Village before it was fashionable, and she turned out better for it, I think. My husband used to say that the moment people know what you have, they start calculating. Better to fly under the radar. So we had. She called me in November, breathless in the particular way she got when she was trying not to sound too excited and failing completely. "Mum, I'm bringing someone home for Christmas. His name is Damien. I think you're going to like him." I spent the week before Christmas baking shortbread and second-guessing the guest room quilt. My daughter had been careful about relationships since a difficult breakup 4 years earlier. She worked as a landscape architect in Vancouver, had good sense and good friends, and she took her times about things that mattered. So when she said she thought I'd like him, I believed her. Damien arrived on the afternoon of the 23rd in a rental car, which I thought was a bit odd since my daughter had driven up from Vancouver. He said he'd flown in from Calgary. He had dark hair, a good coat, and a handshake that was warm and practiced in equal measure. "Your daughter has told me so much about this place," he said, standing in the doorway and looking past me toward the valley. "It's stunning. How long have you had the property?" 30 years, give or take, I told him. "And it's just you now?" He said it softly, with the careful sympathy of someone who'd been told something in advance. My daughter had obviously told him about her father. "I'm sorry for your loss. This must have been his dream." It was, both of ours. The 4 days of Christmas were pleasant enough. He was attentive to my daughter, helpful with dishes, asked thoughtful questions about nursing. On Christmas Eve, we walked the orchard after dark with flashlights, and he was charming and easy. I liked him. It was only on Christmas Day after dinner, when we moved to the living room and he stood at the window watching the lights reflect off the lake, that he said, "What does the property run these days, if you don't mind me asking?" "Assessment-wise?" I minded a little, but I answered. "Just over 2.4, I said. He nodded, still looking at the window. "Must be worth more than that, realistically." Not a question, a statement. I let it go. He visited 3 more times before May. Once in February for a long weekend, once in March, when he and my daughter stopped for dinner on their way back from Kelowna, and once in April when he came alone. My daughter had a site visit in Richmond, ostensibly to drop off a bottle of wine and fix a leaking tap in the mudroom. He stayed for 3 hours. Each time, the property came up, never aggressively, never obviously. A different angle every visit. Had I thought about whether the orchard should be managed through a co-op? Did I have a financial planner handling my estate? Had I looked at what similar properties in the area were listing for? Had I considered a family trust structure for tax purposes? "I work with a lot of clients on intergenerational wealth management," he said in April, while I made us tea. People don't think about it early enough. By the time they need to make decisions, sometimes they're not in the position to make them well. 32 years of triage teaches you to listen to what people say and what they mean at the same time. I heard both. That evening, after he left, I sat in my husband's old chair in the study, the one that still had the shape of him in the cushions, and I called my estate lawyer. She'd been my husband's notary first, then mine, and she had handled the Valley's property transfers and probate for 30 years, with a particular clarity I'd always trusted. "I need you to look into someone for me," I said. "I might be completely wrong, but I'd rather be wrong than not ask." She told me she'd call by the end of the week. She called on a Thursday. "Can you come into the office?" she said. "I'd rather not do this on the phone." Her office smelled like cedar and old files. There was a folder on the desk. She didn't open it right away. She looked at me the way people look when they have to say something they wish they didn't have to. "Your instincts are good," she said. Damien had done this before. There was a family in Kelowna, a woman in her early 50s, recently widowed, an early-stage diagnosis that hadn't yet affected her daily function. Her daughter had been seeing someone for about 5 months. The engagement lasted 3 weeks. The man disappeared after the family's notary flagged some unusual inquiries. The family had paid a sum. My lawyer said the number quietly, $180,000, to make him go away and sign a non-disclosure agreement. They hadn't gone to police. Nothing was technically prosecutable. He'd asked questions. He'd attended meetings. He'd smiled and left. The name on that file was different, my lawyer said, but the description, the method, the timeline, it's him. I sat with that for a moment. "He's been telling me he's a certified financial planner," I said. "His credentials," she said carefully, "don't appear in the CFP board registry. His firm is registered in Alberta as a numbered company with 1 employee. Him." 4 days later, my doctor called me in the evening. She'd been my GP for 11 years, had talked me through my husband's death, with a steadiness I will always be grateful for. When she called at 7 on a Tuesday evening, I knew it wasn't routine. "He came to see me," she said. "Your daughter's fiancé. He made an appointment 2 weeks ago. He'd come in claiming to be concerned about me. He'd described symptoms, forgetfulness, confusion, repeating myself, getting disoriented in familiar places. He'd asked what the early warning signs of vascular dementia looked like in women my age. He'd asked about medications that could affect decision-making capacity. He'd asked specifically about the process under BC law for establishing that someone lacked the capacity to manage their own financial affairs. He asked about the Representation Agreement Act by name, she said. Not everyone knows that legislation exists. He did. He's not a worried family member, she said. He's done research. She had her own reasons for calling, she told me. Her mother had been a victim of financial elder abuse in her 60s. A trusted neighbor, not a stranger. By the time the family understood what had happened, 3 years of pension income had been redirected. Her mother had spent her last years in a care facility that was fine, but not what she'd have chosen for herself, because the money she'd set aside was gone. I've seen what that looks like from the end, my doctor said. I'm not going to watch it start without saying something. The investigator my lawyer recommended was a quiet man from Summerland who had spent 20 years with the RCMP before going private. He didn't say much at our first meeting. He walked through the kitchen, looked at the window where Damien liked to stand, and made a few notes in a small leather book. People show you who they are, he said, when they think the room is empty. He installed 3 cameras, kitchen, living room, back entry, motion activated, encrypted, legal under BC law. He'd confirmed with a retired judge, a lens no larger than a shirt button behind the salt crock on the shelf. Another inside the smoke detector near the back door. He told me I wouldn't see them, but they would see everything. He came back a week later with a file. The photograph inside showed a man 10 years younger, harder looking. The name underneath wasn't Damien. The gambling debts were from Alberta. 3 creditors, 2 civil judgments. He had moved provinces twice. The Kelowna case was confirmed. Before that, a woman in Edmonton, older, recently widowed, whose family had paid him to leave. He'd never been charged. He'd never taken money directly. He asked questions, attended meetings, built trust, then positioned himself to be indispensable at exactly the moment when indispensable meant access. He knows BC law specifically, the investigator said. The Representation Agreement Act allows someone with diminished capacity to name a representative to manage financial decisions. If a person appears to lack capacity through documentation, through the right witnesses, through a consistent narrative built over time, a court can appoint a committee of estate. He paused. He was planning to build that narrative. Then, to be the person your daughter turned to when it happened. I thought about every cup of tea he'd offered to make, every time he'd insisted on helping in the kitchen. I thought about the tea I'd poured out last month because it tasted strange, and I'd blamed the new brand. We set a trap, I said. We set a trap, he agreed. I invited Damien to dinner on the first Saturday of June. My daughter was in Vancouver for a client presentation. I cooked the roast chicken I could make in my sleep, set the table properly, and played every part of the gracious soon-to-be mother-in-law. We talked about the wedding, a small ceremony near Penticton in September, a venue my daughter had found and loved. We talked about his business. He circled back, eventually, to estate planning. Had I thought about updating my documentation? He knew a notary in Kelowna, very good, very discreet. Sometimes it helps to have someone walk you through these things while you're still sharp, he said, before things get complicated. At 7:30, I pressed 2 fingers to my temple and apologized. A headache. The dry heat. I filled a glass of water from the tap, set it on the counter, excused myself to find an aspirin, and walked upstairs. I watched the kitchen on the tablet the investigator had given me. For 5 seconds after I left, Damien didn't move. Then he stood, walked to the foot of the stairs, and listened. He returned to the kitchen, reached into his jacket pocket, and took out a small amber prescription bottle. He worked efficiently. He shook a tablet onto a spoon. He crushed it. He poured the powder into my water glass and stirred it with a spoon from the back of the drawer. Not the one already on the counter, a clean one, I noticed that, and tapped the rim until nothing remained visible. He wiped the spoon with a paper towel. He put the bottle back in his pocket. He arranged himself at the table. 53 seconds, measured and practiced. I came back downstairs. He handed me the glass, solicitous, warm. Drink this. Hydration helps with headaches. My phone rang. I had set the alarm myself for that exact moment. I turned away, wrapped the glass in the dish towel I'd placed within reach, and poured the water into the sink, keeping the towel between my hand and the glass the entire time. The investigator collected everything 30 minutes after Damien left. The lab results came 4 days later. Zopiclone, a prescription sedative. In someone my age, my doctor said, the dose was double the standard. It would cause significant disorientation, loss of coordination, potentially loss of consciousness. Documented on video witnessed by a third party, it would look like exactly what he needed it to look like. My lawyer, my doctor, and the investigator sat in my kitchen on a Wednesday evening in late August. The RCMP sergeant who joined us worked elder financial abuse cases out of Penticton detachment. She had reviewed the file. She had watched the video. She was ready. I told them I didn't want a quiet arrest. They looked at me. I said, "My daughter needs to see this herself. Not hear about it afterward. Not read it in a summary. She needs to be in the room when the truth comes out, or she will spend 2 years wondering if we were wrong." The sergeant considered it. "I'll be there in plain clothes," she said, 2 officers outside. The rehearsal dinner was on the Friday evening before the ceremony, at a restaurant in Penticton, long tables, good Oliver wine, 60 people. Damien was charming and easy, exactly as he always was. He touched my daughter's hand every few minutes. She laughed at the right moments. But she kept checking her phone. And twice, when Damien looked away, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Near the end of the evening, when Damien went to use the washroom, she leaned slightly across the table and, without any visible movement, slid a folded cocktail napkin under my wine glass. She didn't look at me. She kept talking to the woman on her left. I opened it under the table. "Help me, Mum." 2 words, her handwriting. She came to my room at the inn at 7 the next morning, still in pajamas, and sat on the edge of the bed the way she had when she was small and couldn't sleep. She'd been at his rental in Penticton 2 weeks earlier, she said. She'd gone to surprise him, found the door unlocked, heard him on a call in the bedroom. She'd stood in the hallway and listened. She'd heard him say, "The old woman is cooperative. She doesn't suspect anything. Once the ceremony is done, I'll have the standing to escalate the documentation. And then, she won't fight it. They never do at that point." She'd been carrying it for 9 days. "I didn't know if you'd believe me," she said. "I didn't know if I believed it myself. I kept telling myself I'd misheard. I kept looking for an explanation." She looked at me. "He laughed, Mum, when he said it about you." I held my daughter's hands and I told her everything. The investigator, the cameras, the lab results, the previous case in Kelowna, the RCMP sergeant who would be sitting in the 4th row of the ceremony in less than an hour. My daughter sat very still. "You knew," she said. "I suspected, then I knew. Then I waited until the proof couldn't be questioned." We were both trying to protect each other. That's what we do. She straightened her spine, the way I've watched her do since she was a teenager, standing at the edge of something difficult. Her father used to do the same thing, a small, private gathering of herself. What do I need to do? The ceremony was at 10 in a small stone chapel outside Penticton, apple orchards on 3 sides, the Okanagan Hills in the distance. September light, 80 guests, my daughter walking the aisle on her own, because she'd always intended to. At the front of the chapel, Damien looked like every version of himself I'd been shown. The posture, the measured smile, the performance of warmth. His best man stood beside him. A friend from Calgary, or so we'd been told. The officiant moved through the words. When he reached the traditional question, "If anyone knows of a reason these two should not be married, let them speak now," I stood. The chapel went quiet in the way that spaces go quiet when something is happening that wasn't supposed to happen. Damien turned to look at me. Behind the performance, for half a second, I saw something cold and flat. I do, I said. 32 years of emergency nursing teaches you how to be steady when it matters. My voice didn't waver once. I'm sorry to do this here. I'm not sorry to do it at all. I spoke to the room. I said that my daughter's fiancé had visited my Naramata property 4 times and had asked about its assessed value, my estate planning, and my financial arrangements on every single occasion. I said he had gone to my family doctor in secret to ask about dementia screening, cognitive capacity assessments, and medications that affected decision-making in older women. I said that on the first Saturday of June he had placed a prescription sedative into a glass of water he then handed me, that we had this on camera, and that the liquid had been independently tested and confirmed. I said he had done a version of this before to a family in Kelowna, and that they had paid him to disappear because they had no documentation. I said we had documentation. The RCMP sergeant stood from the 4th row. Damien looked at her and then at me, and I watched him understand in real time that there was no version of charm that could get him out of this room. He didn't say anything as she and the second officer walked him out. No protest, no performance. Whatever he had been building for years simply stopped. The best man tried the side door and found it already covered. My daughter stood at the altar in her dress and watched them leave. She didn't cry until they were gone, and then she did, and I held her in front of 80 people, and no one moved or spoke for a long moment. Outside, through the stone walls, I could hear the wind moving through the orchards. He pled guilty the following spring. The evidence was, his lawyer apparently conceded, difficult to argue against. The video, the lab results, the prior case in Kelowna, whose family finally agreed to come forward now that there was something substantive to attach to, and the documents recovered from his Penticton rental. A printed copy of the BC Representation Agreement Act, a printout of my BC assessment, notes in his handwriting about my husband's pension and my nurse's pension and what he believed the estate to total. He had been close in his estimates. He had not known about the full picture of my husband's RIF, or the life insurance, or 2 decades of careful, quiet accumulation. He'd found what county records and public documents would show anyone willing to look. He'd thought he'd found a comfortable widow with valuable land. He had not understood that the land was only part of it. My daughter came back to Naramata for the winter. She worked remotely from the farmhouse, walked the orchard every morning, saw a counselor in Kelowna every 2nd week. After a few months, she said she was starting to feel like herself again. The anger came in waves, she said. So did the grief, because she had loved who she thought he was, and that loss was real even if the person hadn't been. In December, we planted a new row of apple trees at the far end of the property. The ones my husband had been staking the afternoon he died. I'd left the stakes in the ground for 3 years. It felt right to finish it. I told my daughter the full picture of our finances. The way I'd kept it vague, because her father had believed people should build their own lives before they understood what they stood to inherit. She took it quietly. I wouldn't have done anything differently, she said, even knowing. I believed her. If I could go back to that December afternoon when Damien stood at my kitchen window asking about the BC assessment, I would trust my reaction faster. Not act recklessly, but trust it sooner, without 3 days of talking myself out of what I already knew. 32 years in emergency nursing teaches you that the body understands danger before the mind finds words for it. I had that knowledge. I second-guessed it anyway because I wanted to be wrong, because being right meant my daughter had been deceived by someone she loved. What I know now is this: the most important thing I did was not the wedding, though I am glad I did it there. The most important thing I did was make the first phone call. To my estate lawyer on an evening in May, with my hands steadier than I expected, because I had learned, after 32 years of triage, after raising a daughter, after 3 years of managing this land alone, that asking for help is not weakness. It is the only sensible response, to something larger than you can handle on your own. We are safe. The orchard is going to be fine. And my daughter, who is her father's daughter in every way that matters, is already looking forward to spring.